Welcome to the Envision Greatness podcast, the go-to podcast for personal and professional growth. I'm your host, Brittany Clausen. This podcast centers conversations on life lessons learned through emotional intelligence and inclusive leadership so that you can get a new perspective wherever you are in life. Each episode equips you with the essential tools and actionable strategies to enhance your perspective and foster deeper connections within yourself and those around you. Join me and let's envision greatness together. All right. How was that?
That was great. That was good. I like it.
Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Envision Greatness podcast. I'm here with one of our amazing guests. Actually, I think the first guest I've ever had on the podcast. So I am so grateful. Yes. Today we have Brandon Jones. He is the executive director at Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health, or MACMA for short, here in the Twin Cities. Brandon is an expert in adverse childhood experiences, historical and intergenerational trauma, social emotional intelligence, leadership, and intercultural development inventory. I'm really reading this. Yeah. All right, so you must know Brandon holds a BA in sociology from the University of Minnesota, a master's in community psychology from Metro State University, and a master's in psychotherapy from Adler Graduate School. Not to mention, Brandon is also a 2013 Bush Foundation Leadership Fellow, and it speaks in this room today. Also, Brandon is a devoted father to three beautiful children, three beautiful girls.
Yep.
I have to mention Brandon is a light worker. He's a community engager. And today he's going to talk to us about post-traumatic growth. So please help me welcome Brandon Jones. So happy that you're here.
Absolutely. Yes. It's good to be here. And I'm a fan of you. I know I have a lot of credentials, a lot of experience, but I always can learn from folks. And that's one thing that I've definitely done with you. So I'm looking forward to being on your podcast.
Absolutely. I'm grateful. I'm seriously so grateful before we even get started, because Brandon, I feel like we know each other. You've mentioned it before. You know my family in some way, shape, or form. So I love that we're already connected. And I'm looking forward to talking more about post-traumatic growth, because when you introduced that conversation to me, that just all these light bulbs in my head just went off. Like, what are we really talking about here? So but before we get into that, I have a couple questions for you. And I just really want to share with our audience, because oftentimes we look at the person and all their accolades, as you said, but like when I say light worker, I really mean a passion for the community in a way that adds value and heals people from their trauma. So I'm going to start pretty heavy, because
let's do it.
Go big or go home, right? So the first question that I have for you is, tell me a time when you faced a significant challenge or trauma that you initially thought would be damaging. How did that experience ultimately help you grow in unexpected ways?
Yeah, absolutely. Great first question. You know, it is a heavy question, but honestly, my answer to that question is how I got started in doing therapy, honestly, and mental health work. I often joke and say I grew up in a household full of trauma and drama. And my trauma and drama was I seen a lot of domestic violence as a kid. I was the oldest. I had two younger brothers. And I grew up in an abusive household where my stepfather was the abuser. Now, I didn't know he was my stepfather until I was almost 12 years old, and my maternal grandmother let out the family secret. So my mom's mom told me, your dad is not that guy. Your dad is this guy. And that was like when my world kind of shifted, or my worldview shifted as a kid. You know, I was almost 12. I had just grew a little hair under my arms. You know, I was feeling myself. You know, I thought I was a hot boy, you know, all that type of stuff. And I remember having this letdown experience when I actually met my biological father. He showed up late and he was intoxicated. So I went from this mindset of, okay, one guy who thought was my dad was an abuser. The other guy who is my dad didn't even show up on time to see me, and he was intoxicated. And I remember just having this mindset of, well, I can't trust men, more specifically Black men. And I kept that mentality probably for the next 12 years of my life until I went to therapy. I was about 24, 25 years old when I went to therapy. That was traumatic because, and we know this in the Black community when it comes to fatherhood and how much of an impact that not having fathers and fatherlessness does. And those fathers who are around, if they're not constructive men, how much damage
Mhm.
that does as well. That I was always on this pathway of just trying to navigate my young male development without having
Yeah.
an archetype or role model or a foundation. So it was really
Yeah.
just a big discovery period for myself that was fueled with a lot of anger. So I was a
Mhm.
smart kid. I was a nerd, but I played football really well because I had a lot of anger. So, and that's a venue where you can display that level of anger without people really questioning it. But when I was on the football field, I was real quiet, stuck to the books. I just kind of did my thing. No one questioned it, but I was struggling internally. And that ultimately kind of drove me towards the mental health field was my upbringing. Now,
Okay.
I originally didn't go to school to be a therapist. I originally went to school to be a dentist, and that didn't work out.
Okay.
I almost flunked out at the University of Minnesota. The only class I was passing was a class called People and Problems, probably because I knew a bunch of people with a bunch of problems. And I decided to switch my major to whatever that was. And one day after class, I went and talked to my professor, Dr. Heidi Barajas. I give her a lot of credit. She doesn't know that, but she was the first person to just like validate my experience at the University of
Mm.
Minnesota campus. And I went to talk to her after class, and I was just like, she was calling on me one day in class, and I don't know why. I was just I was just in the zone answering questions.
Yeah.
She stopped in the middle of this big lecture. I was like 80 plus students in this lecture hall. She says, I don't know who's studying with that kid, but whoever is going to pass the next exam. And she was talking about me, and
Mm.
I was like, oh, snap. So I went and talked to her. I said, hey, don't point me out. That it make me feel comfortable. Like, I appreciate if you don't do that. And what she told me was, no, Brandon, I've been reading your essays. You get this. You should think about getting a
Mm.
PhD. Now, mind you, this is 2004. I'm a first generation college student. I'm just happy that I
Yeah.
made it. Like I made it to a campus. I didn't even know what a PhD was. I had to go
Right.
back to my dorm room and Google what is a PhD, and I found out there's something called grad school, which was college after college, is how I explained it back
Right.
then.
Yep.
And then that just like sparked a fire. Keep going, because she said I can do this. I don't even know what this is, but I'm gonna try to figure it out. And that's what really pushed me, from an academic standpoint. And then I had an experience where I worked in a psych ward, and I noticed a lot of the patients that we had in our unit were
Mhm.
behaviors that looked like people in the community that I knew. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, you act just like Reggie, or you act just like Sasha does. No, you have a mental illness, but no one ever called it that. And that's what ultimately kind of led to my journey as a mental health professional.
Okay. So that
Yeah.
was jam packed, and I
Yeah.
and I appreciate that perspective because I know a lot of people listening or seeing this can relate to you in many ways. And one thing that I heard also too is that you kind of unhaphazardly found some support, like through
Right.
affirmations, people seeing you for who you are, not
Right.
seeing kind of the outward facing, person angry or shy
Right.
or just like suppressed. That person, your professor, really saw something in you that I think um, I've heard time after time when people see you for all of your gifts and beyond the facade, that really helps kind of bring you to that next level to where you can discover, because oftentimes you may not even be able to see yourself because of the
Right.
pain that you've experienced. So I think
Absolutely.
that's amazing. And just, I congratulate you on all of the consistency, because I know that having this type of upbringing and going through this is something where a lot of people give up, to be honest, and they
Absolutely.
succumb to some of these stereotypes.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's like they think life is over. And I applaud you because you're an example to a lot of men, black men
Yeah.
and boys, to say, hey, I can do it, you can too. And I'm curious about, during this journey, like, what were some emotional or mental shifts that you had to make during this process of healing? How, what were some realizations or discoveries you've had along the way?
Yeah.
Either, you mentioned your professor was able to point something out to you, but what else
Yeah.
did you learn?
Yeah. I've learned a lot. And I'm still learning. That's a big piece of this as well. Like, healing's not a destination, it's a journey. And if you're not paying attention and learning from the things you go through, you're missing things. Like, I often say, like, my failures are lessons, and my losses are lessons, and my failures are blessings. So, like, being able to take anything that you go through and take, okay, what did I learn from it? And I always had the mindset, I survived. Like, I'm still alive, so I'm
Mhm.
gonna keep going. And
Mhm.
honestly, that came from when I was a kid. Like, always bounce back. No matter what happens, bounce back. I used to always keep in the back of my head, like, somebody has a worse life than me. Like, that was my motivation to
Mhm.
keep going. Even though when things were tough, most of my childhood memories are like violent things that happened in my family. But for the most part, I just kept moving forward, kept going. And that's what helped me. I've had other people. I highlight her, but there were other people. Mitch
Yeah.
McDonald, who was my seventh grade teacher, um, Crystal Buford, who was one of my college academic providers. Like there was just a lot of different people who've helped me. But I think the biggest realization that helped me move forward, it's gonna sound kind of crazy, but I can connect it back to leadership too, was when I seen my mom as a woman and not my mother.
Ooh, let's talk about it. What?
So yeah, so being the oldest and being in the family dynamic that I was in, a lot of times I had to have adult responsibilities. And my
Mhm.
mom used to tell me, even when I was very young, like, Brandon, I need your help. You need to step up and do these things. Or I would just assume leadership, which I didn't look at it that like that at the time. I was helping my mom. So like
Yeah.
I learned how to cook really. I was like 6 years old making like hamburger helper and spaghetti and stuff. Like I would thaw the
Mhm.
meat, brown it.
Mhm.
That was me at 6. Like that's I haven't. I just started letting my 11-year-old cook on the stove. Like I
You
would
popped
never
out the
normally
room
do
and
that.
just kept
Yeah,
going.
yeah. But she trusted me, and I had to do those things because when my stepfather wasn't around, she needed to work a second shift or do something. So Brandon, you need to cook this food and then get ready for your brothers. Like you gotta get help them get ready for school, stuff like that. So I've always kind of assumed leadership. And I remember, that carried on to when I went to college. And I remember sophomore year at the University of Minnesota, I was working 2 jobs and I had an internship and go to school full time. So I was like
Mhm.
grooving. And I remember
Mhm.
my mom would call me like every Thursday, right before I got paid, like, hey, I need some money, I need this. And the trade-off was she would let me like borrow her car when I didn't
Mm.
have a car. So I
Yeah.
remember when I got a car, she kept calling. I'm like, I don't need your car no more. Like she kept calling. And I remember I had to say no to my mom for the first time. That was the one of the hardest conversations
Mm.
I've ever had in my life. And I remember she called me. I knew the ask was coming, and it did. And I said, you know what, mom, I can't do it. I can't, because if I keep doing this, you're not gonna stop, and I'm not gonna know how to move forward. And that's when I stopped seeing her as my mother, the woman who's been abused most of my life,
Mhm.
who needs me to help her. And I seen her as a woman, somebody who's gone through life experiences. And I
Mhm.
have to at some point break away from that trauma bond that we have in order for
Right.
my life to keep moving forward. Now, I say that because in my therapeutic experience, I know tons of clients that I've had who've had
Mhm.
similar dynamics with other family members, especially with parents. And it's not that I disrespected my mom or discredited her, but I had to step up and set a boundary for myself. Otherwise,
Right.
I would not be able to grow to where I needed to go. And I'm in better position now to help my mom whenever she needs it than I probably would have been if we would have kept that dynamic going. That has been very helpful in my
Wow.
life in many different ways because it taught me how to be assertive. When you go through a lot of trauma, especially in family dynamics, we don't know how to be assertive. We don't know how to be vulnerable. We don't know how to say no. We don't know how to take care of ourselves very often. And I learned that at a very age, and it's helped me in almost every life circumstance that I've been in since.
That's amazing you bring that up. I actually wrote the word boundaries and then you just hit right into
Yeah.
it because I'm like, how do you help individuals who may not see the need for a boundary as in um maybe they don't know their worth. Maybe they
Yep.
maybe they don't even look at it as it's a part of self-worth. Like this is just
Right.
what they've been doing. How did you come to that actualization of, hey, I need boundaries with my mom? What, like, I know that there was a physical need to
Yeah.
have to do that, but like you also said, like, this is the first time I said no. Like, how did
Yeah.
you build up to that? Because I think there's a piece of that, like, I know for myself, one thing I have struggled with boundaries is like I'm walking on eggshells. Like I don't know that I can say the thing, right? Because and then the
Right.
time that I do say it, it's almost like anger coming out of
Right.
it because it's like
Yeah.
I'm done. So like
Yeah.
what would be your advice to folks that are kind of in this like contention point of like, I need to assert some boundaries. I know that's the right thing to do, but like, I don't know
Yeah.
how that's going to go.
Yeah, the first thing that I would recommend that people do is understand what their needs are with the boundary. Because you may just be feeling like you need to do something, but you might not be clear on like the why. So I think it's
Mm,
important to understand. So for me at that time, I didn't know what I was doing. Me being able to talk about it now, is more reflecting on how I got to where I am. At the time, I was
Mhm.
just at a place where I was like, man, if I give her this $600, I'm not gonna be able to go party with my friends and meet these girls that I want to see. Like, it was just very like surface level stuff at that time. Like, I'm not gonna be
Yeah.
able to hang out with my friends because I'm gonna have like $40 left for the rest of the
Right.
weekend. I couldn't do that. So for me at the time, it was like I was just hitting a breaking point, and I realized I'm gonna have to do something, and or this pattern will continue. You know, today my answer is a little different. Like, you need to understand how you want to you respect yourself and how you want other people to respect you as well. That's to me what boundaries are.
Mm.
The expectations of how I'm treated, and the expectations of how I want people to treat me. So you have to be able to articulate what are your boundaries.
Mhm.
Boundaries aren't just saying no. It's about the
Mhm.
expectation of treatment. And you need to figure that out for yourself. Now, some people might be like, well, how do I do that? And it's something I call adaptive awareness. You have to start paying attention to the things that are bothering you, paying attention to the things that annoy you, that agitate you, that get on your nerves, and then respond. Okay, how would my life be different if this wasn't there? What do I need to do to make the shift or the change? Do I need to balance
Mhm.
something, etc.? Once you do that, now you have to make the choice, right? And the choice is the hard part because we don't want to upset people. We don't want to be
Right.
isolated. We don't want to be talked about or gossiped about. But sometimes that
Mhm.
sacrifice of that short term, disagreement or that short term isolation may be all you need to keep moving forward. So it is a risk
Mm.
that people have to take, but it's a risk to help you grow and move forward.
Wow. 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 I think that chimes right into where we want to go, talking about post-traumatic growth, because I'm curious, like, um, from kind of the situations that you've been in, that you've kind of
Mhm.
learned and grown from, and then been able to like reframe it to be a learning experience. How has that shaped? First of all, what is post traumatic growth, and how
Yeah,
has your experiences shaped this learning around post traumatic growth?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I wish I came up with the term. I'll be a multi-billionaire by now, but I didn't. I didn't. But my discovery of post-traumatic growth happened, I think in 2018, 2017. I've been one of the people in the state of Minnesota that's done ACEs training, so adverse childhood experiences. And in Minnesota, we have been very productive and proactive around ACEs, and a lot of people have come across this learning and understanding. So when I do
Mm-hmm.
these trainings, I often get asked, "Well, Brandon, what is next? Like, we get this trauma stuff, but what do we do with it?" So I was on
Right.
a hunt to kind of answer that question for people because I didn't know. I was just doing what I was, conditioned and trained to do. Make sure people have the awareness, but not the
Mm-hmm.
application of what to do afterwards. So I stumbled upon post traumatic growth, which is ultimately just changing. It's your ability to still find enjoyment and purpose in
Mm-hmm.
life, even after something traumatic has happened. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of people, they'll go through trauma. They're told you need to heal your trauma, which I have a problem with the word heal, and I'll talk about that in a second.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're told to keep moving on. But how do you do that when your trauma is something that doesn't go away? How do you do that when your trauma is something that's pretty significant? And a lot of people over time have identified themselves with their trauma, which I think is a
Mm-hmm.
huge mistake psychologically, just for your own mindset. And
Mm-hmm.
what post traumatic growth gets you to do is separate yourself from what has happened, not ignore
Mm-hmm.
it, but saying that was a moment in time in your life. It did have an impact, but you can still keep going. It's really just like resiliency on steroids. It's
Yeah.
like, how do you just keep moving forward? It's post traumatic growth. So for me in my life, I grew up in a domestic violence home, but that hasn't stopped me. I'm a black man. I understand historical trauma. I understand white supremacy. I understand it all
Mm-hmm.
these systems. Those things
Mm-hmm.
haven't stopped me from being a good father, being a good husband when I was one, being somebody who feels like they can, academically excel, being a good friend, being a good community member, reaching out, helping folks, connecting, and not expecting something back. Those values come from a different place, not the trauma that I go through. So it's the ability to keep moving forward and finding purpose within life. And I've been a big pusher of this post traumatic growth concept over the last few years because I really think this is what can help people move forward. But also
Yeah.
understanding that this journey is not destinational. Like, we're just not gonna find post traumatic growth and be happy in the post traumatic growth resort. Like, you got to keep going because our lives our lives keep moving forward. The trauma that I experienced as a
Mhm.
kid, I told you I went to therapy when I was about 24, 25 years old. And I dealt with that trauma at that time as a young 25-year-old black male. I wasn't married. I wasn't a father. I wasn't any of that. But when I got married and we had our first child, a lot of those emotions that I had back then came right back because I had a new status in life, a new experience. I was
Mhm.
responsible for not only this child's life, but also being a partner to someone else. And I had to figure that out. And I felt like I was fathering without a foundation. I didn't have the tools or even the ideas of what I should be doing outside of what I read in textbooks. But without that life experience, it became very heavy for me. So that's when I realized, this trauma thing, it's not just something you just heal from, it's healing. Like you have to keep growing and going as much as possible
Mhm.
and building those coping skills as you go.
Okay. Sorry, my Wi-Fi just did like a whole little 360
It's
spin. So
all
I'm
good.
listening to you. I'm like all into it. And
No
then a
worries.
thing happened.
You're good.
Brandon, I want you to get into that healing piece that you talked about. Like,
Yeah.
I'm healed from this. I'm even, in a Christian way, I'm delivered from this. Can you
Yeah.
speak
I'm
to
delivered.
kind of this arrival point around healing? That would be really insightful for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. I think you get to arrival points like checkpoints. Like you made it to this space to keep moving forward. It's like realization. Like you realize, oh, I'm here. This has happened. This is what I need. But you have to keep moving forward. You don't stay there. And I think life forces us to have checkpoints. And sometimes those checkpoints are unwanted things, unexpected things, but they are there. And sometimes there are things that you work towards. Some of the major ones that are in our lives are like graduating high school, right? Getting your first
Mhm.
job, being in a serious relationship, getting out of a serious relationship, having a child, a death of a significant family member. Like these things happen, and you do some reassessment in your life about what's going on. Now, what happens next is truly up to
Mhm.
you. How do you move forward from those bigger life things that take place? And that's one of the things that I like to look at when I'm working with people, individuals, where I'm talking about leadership coaching or counseling or whatever, is
Yep.
like, how are you managing these life things that are taking place? How are you moving forward? A lot of the folks that I work with these days are workaholics. Like they just keep working. It's like, well, is that the best thing for you as well? Like you just keep plowing away at your job. You're stressed out. You're almost burnt out. Should you keep moving forward in that way? What can you do? So just not stopping at these destinations, but taking moments to realize and recognize what's happening, but also understanding that there's still journey for you to keep moving forward towards.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So what you're bringing up also is something that I talk with people, but I'd love to get your perspective.
Mhm.
Healing is, like you said, it's checkpoints. It's places in your life that you've restored some part of you where you can look in reflection to what you've
Yep.
been through and be like, well, it didn't break me, it didn't crush me,
Right.
it was there maybe to mold you for a different perspective or to teach you something that you needed to know. However, I'm curious because I think people do like to check the box, like to say, okay, well, I've gone through that. I'll never go through that again. As in maybe you're burnt out from a job and they triggered you, or there was something that happened. The word triggered just as in something reminds you at the job of something that's happened personally in your
Right.
life. Like as in, maybe you don't like micromanagement, but at home it was your parent who was telling you you need to do this, you need to do
Yep.
it like
Yep.
this. So now you're like, I can't do micromanagement.
Yeah.
But it's like it's following you everywhere, if you get what I mean.
Absolutely.
It's like,
Yes.
so how do you help people who think it's like, no, it was just that job. I'll go to the next one. I'll go to the next company. I won't have those issues
Mhm.
anymore. Can you talk about that
Yeah.
experience and that journey around healing in that way?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. This is probably where I get in trouble because I started blending in my counseling skills with my coaching skills, and you're not always supposed to do that. But I think that's how we
Mhm.
help people, especially when they're trying to move forward. Um, I'm gonna use personal examples of myself on what I've done. So, as I mentioned, my dynamic with my mom was really significant. She told me something that I've kept with me my entire life, and I fight every day for it now. It's kind of funny. It's helped me and it's hurt me in certain ways. And she told
Mhm.
me, I don't know how old I was. I was super young, but she said, if you want to do something right, do it yourself. And she used to always say that to me, very casually though. Like, Brandon, if you want to do something right, do it yourself. And I kept that
Mhm.
with me. And that's honestly probably why I've had so much success so early in my career is because I just kept doing things myself. But now
Mm-hmm.
that I lead an organization and I have a team of 19 people, I can't do it all by myself. So I struggle with delegating. I struggle with delegating. Like it's one of my
Mm-hmm.
biggest challenges. And I think everybody needs to learn the art of delegation. And I've even had to change my whole mindset around delegating because I would think like, oh, I'm giving people my work. No, I'm
Mm-hmm.
giving people work that's going to enhance their skills. Like that's how I look at delegation now. Because if they
Uh-huh.
have a skill set, even if they won't do it 100% the way that I would, but they have the skill set to get it done, you're investing in them and their development. You're not just passing off your tasks that you don't want to do. So I'm very diligent about that, but it's a challenge for me. And it's always a part of my leadership goals. Anytime I'm a part of a program or something around leadership, I always have delegation there because it's that thing that I just can't shake because my mom ingrained it in me. If you want something done
Mm-hmm.
right, do it yourself. And like I said, it's brought me a lot of benefits. I get a lot of things done. I show up for a lot of different people. A lot of people count on me.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, I also don't ask for help for a lot of things. So I'm not a big
Mm-hmm.
asker of help. So I have to like continue to unravel this thing as a part of my traumatic experience growing up in the household dynamic that I did. Wasn't My mom wasn't being malicious, she wasn't trying to like hurt me
Mm-hmm.
with that. She was just saying, Brandon, you got to handle business. Like listen, dude, like I'm not always gonna be here to help you, son. You got to figure it out. And what that's done though in my adulthood is it's limited my ability in some other areas when I probably should have asked for help or passed off some
Mm-hmm.
other things to other people. And you see
Mm-hmm.
this pattern happen with a lot of folks in leadership. I would just say in life in general, but especially leaders, where the habits and the values that we've developed young are things that stick with us, but they also can get in our way and trip us up when we're leading teams
Mm-hmm.
or organizations or whatever the case may be. So it does happen. So when I'm in a coaching dynamic, I always get a little context, a little background of people. I'll ask them about their siblings. I'll ask them about
Mm-hmm.
like what did they do when they were like teenagers? Like were you part of any sports teams or clubs? What
Mm-hmm.
were your parents' dynamics like? What did you help them with? Because all those things kind of inform how they view, because we're talking about worldviews, the jobs that they do today. So it's definitely a connection there.
So, what advice would you give for those who don't recognize some of these maybe these harmful memories that maybe came up from advice that was helpful in one season, but now it's hurting you in another season of your leadership or just kind of showing up? What advice do you have for those who maybe don't see it that way? Like it, how will you know that there's like a contention point, or how do they know that there's something that's disrupting that pattern and they're
Yeah,
kind of
that's a
holding on
good.
to it for like safety because
Yeah. Oh yeah.
they're used to it? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? How what advice would you
Uh,
share, or what thoughts do you
Yeah.
have?
Absolutely. I actually would flip what you just said. They're not
Okay.
holding on for safety. They're holding on for fear. Like
Mm,
a lot of times, people don't want to let go because it's a part of their comfort zone, even when it's
yep,
not working. That
yep,
that's why that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people get to burnout is because they're holding on to stuff that they probably shouldn't, but they have
yep,
the fear of what's on the other side of that because you don't know. There's a lot of unknown there,
yes,
and humans are more likely to hold on to what we know than to
yep,
let go and figure out what may be next. And you see this
yep,
with leaders all the time.
yep.
And if you ask them, because I like to just disrupt people's thought process and ask the tough questions, they'll say, "I don't know why I do that," or they'll just come to a point where they're just like, "Oh, I guess I do that," and it's like they have to face reality of the things that they're
Mm,
actually doing and what's happening. So honestly, it's just questioning and drilling down on what the challenges are for that individual, and it's subjective. It depends on who you're working with and how you're working with them. But
mhm,
I use a lot of CBT when I'm doing like leadership coaching and stuff because you start to get down to the core beliefs of like why people do the things that they do, why do they
yeah.
approach situations, why do they think the way they think, like all that kind of drills back down to who they are personally.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, can you explain CBT?
CBT, yeah, I probably shouldn't just drop acronyms.
Yeah.
Yes, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and ultimately the main idea of it is to align your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. Now that may
Mhm.
sound weird to average people, but a lot of folks they'll behave in ways, but they may think a different way than what they behave,
Mhm.
and they may feel a different way than what they think and what they do. So it's one way to kind of realign yourself as an individual.
That's amazing. And I use CBT often with my coaching clients, just because there's things where you may not even articulate it by your words, but
Yep.
through these kinds of activities, you're able to uncover things that at surface level you just didn't even know was there. So,
Right.
and it's good for repetition and practice when you are trying to change a habit. Um, Okay, so you know what, you touched on a lot of things today around some of these questions that I had prepared for you. I'm like, you already kind of talked about
It's
these
okay.
things.
You can ask
So,
again. It's all good.
I wanted to kind of ask you. So, what maybe when you talk about post traumatic growth and think about, like, for folks who may not identify as leaders, because we do have people that don't even see themselves in this space. And when I say leaders, I'm also saying people that advocate for themselves to grow and bring others along.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about being in community, how can people conceptualize post traumatic growth going forward? So from this conversation today, how can they start this journey around post traumatic growth?
Yeah. I would just say pick something that you want to shift in your life right now. It could be anything. It could be personal. It can be professional. It can be something small. Like I want to lose 10 pounds, right? No, it's not small for some people, but for some people, it's just like they just got to get started, right? And then it happen. But there's 5 pillars to post traumatic growth. And what I recommend with folks is that you just pick one of those pillars or domains to start with, whatever your issue may be. The first pillar of post traumatic growth is understanding your personal strength. And what happens is trauma makes people lose, and it makes people lose their kind of focus on their purpose or purposes in life, and it creates a lot of self-doubt. And
Mm-hmm.
what's important is for people to kind of understand, well, what are my personal strengths? Recognize your ability to handle challenges. Recognize recognize that you survived a situation or a dynamic that you may have been in. Believing in your own possibilities. Like that's just all mindset shifting that people can end up doing. The second domain of post traumatic growth is around healthy relationships. So we kind of talked a lot about boundaries today, which is really the crux of that is like figuring out what your boundaries are. But another thing around healthy relationships that is also important to incorporating post traumatic growth is finding supports and networks that help you to move forward. A lot of people, when we talk about networking, a lot of people talk about it from a professional standpoint, like how do you move up in a career? How do you get into a field? I like to talk about emotional networking. Like, how do you find your team? Like, how do you find your people that are going to help you, like,
Mm-hmm.
just be who you need to be? And that doesn't have to be a big team. Like, it could be like you and maybe one other person and a dog. Like, it could be a couple of different people. It doesn't, or even human being. We'll just say beings, but it doesn't have to be like this super duper big team of emotional, therapists or anything. It could be a pastor. It could be a parent. It could be a cousin. It could be anyone who just helps you recharge. And then also what do they offer for you? Like, what do they recharge? Is, I have people that I talk to just for humor because we always laugh and we share things on social media. I have fantasy football people, so when I want to talk sports, I hop
Mm-hmm.
in the group chat there. Boom, boom, boom. That all helps me recharge, disconnect from my day to day, and I can kind of move forward. The third pillar, I'm gonna give you a long answer. The third
No,
pillar
I love
is
it. I love it. Keep going.
the third pillar or domain is appreciation or purpose in life. This is a big one, and this one takes a lot more work, I think, where you start to understand what your values are and why they are your values. So now you're doing a little deeper work. Those values may come from childhood, they may come from a religious experience, they can come from a relationship, like they can come from a lot of things. But finding out what those values are to you and why they're important to you, then do things that align with your purposes. A lot of people do things that have nothing to do with what they care about. But they just do it because they want to pay bills or they want to make somebody else
Mm-hmm.
happy, whatever. But like figure out the things you need to do that align with your purpose and then celebrate your small victories. This may be the Minnesotan in me, but Minnesota culture, you are taught to be so modest and just so contained that when I meet people and they do things, they minimize. Now I do this too. I minimize a lot of my success. Like, yeah, I'm a Bush fellow, but I don't barely talk about it or anything. Like, but that's like a super big
Right.
thing. Right? But we
Absolutely.
we don't celebrate our victories enough. So people don't give themselves enough credit for the things that they should do. And
Mm.
that's something that a lot of people need to work really hard at doing, is just like, you know what? I did a good job at that report for work. Or you know what? I did graduate high school. That was a big deal. Or I did show up for that person the way that I should. Like, you should start celebrating your small victories. No one's going to be your biggest cheerleader than yourself. So you have to be able to give yourself, that support and that encouragement. All right, there's two more. One more. The
Keep
next one,
going.
number 4. Go ahead. Keep going. All right.
You got it.
All
Hmm.
right. The fourth pillar or domain is what we call consecutive constructive choices. Don't try to say that fast. You will trip up. Consecutive constructive choices. What this means is being able to just explore new people, new information, new places and spaces. Try different stuff. I meet so many people, especially black folks. If you talk about from a cultural standpoint, we stay in our little black bubble. We don't go outside of our black bubble. It's like, man, you missing so much life out here just trying to be in your black bubble. Go out and experience this world. There's so much to offer, because when you have those different experiences, you start to view yourself differently. I remember the
Mm.
first time I left the country. Now I didn't go far. I went to Jamaica, but that experience like still sticks with me, and it was such a like
Hmm.
identity shift for myself, because that was the first
Hmm.
time I was around black people that didn't just think I was black. They were like, "You're American." I was just like, "What? No, you're American." They just kept letting me know. Me and my wife at the time, y'all American, and we were just like, "What does it?" It was so weird, and people spoke to us. That was the other thing. They were like, "Hi." Now, I know it's a Southern thing here in the United States, but
Yeah.
we from the North. Black people don't just speak to you if they don't know you. But down
That's,
there, everyone said hi, even if they were like 15 yards away. Hey, how y'all doing? It's like, what? We were like in a twilight zone of black folks. But that was an experience that actually brought us closer. But it also
hmm.
helped us recognize when we got back to the States, like, oh, we're American. Like, we need to keep that fresh in the back of our heads. So,
Hmm.
being able to have those type of experiences are important for your own personal development. So, you need exposure. You need to be consistent in those types of experiences. And then you need to have some compassion for yourself in those experiences as well. Sometimes you're going to do things, it's not going to work out as well as my experience did, but at least you tried. You're not going to have as much fun, but at least you went and you seen something different. So, branching out and doing different things. And then the last thing, and then I'll shut up and let you ask some questions. The fifth pillar of post traumatic growth is personal development. Always working on yourself. What are you investing in yourself? Is it time? Is it resources? Are you being intentional? Don't be afraid to discover who you are or who you want to be, and
Hmm.
find some things that will help you kind of express who you are in life. Like, all those things will help you grow and keep moving forward. So when I'm coaching and somebody brings up something and they want to kind of tap into this post traumatic growth piece, we're working on those 5 pillars, and I'm asking questions specifically in those areas to help them kind of uncover what they need and how they want to move forward. All right, I'll be quiet now.
No, first of all, I love this because I'm very much, we talk about it on the podcast. We give steps because I think it's one thing to talk about it high level, but then what does it look like to implement it, right? And
Right.
that's where people get tripped up, is like they have the language, but then they don't have the application piece. And
Yep.
I'm all about action. I've always, I was formerly the goal getter coach, and I really
Yeah.
think goals are important. Brandon, you mentioned compassion, and I just
Yep.
think, in the realm of the work that you do, what can you say more about compassion? Because
Yeah.
I think we struggle with giving ourselves compassion over things.
Absolutely. Yeah, we tend to give ourselves more accountability than compassion. And there needs to be a balance there, and I'll talk about that in a second. Compassion is your ability to give yourself grace and space,
Mm,
allowing yourself to understand what has happened, not get yourself too down, but also give yourself some affirmation and some love and care. That's how I look at
mm,
compassion. And a lot of
mm.
people don't do that. But we've been conditioned. This is a very Americanized conditioning thing. If you
Yep.
do bad on a test, what did you get wrong? Fix those answers, right? If you
Hmm.
get a speeding ticket, you were wrong. You were going too fast. No context of what might have been happening. There's a lot of reason for us to be negative in how we make our mistakes or how we go through things in life. But what
Hmm.
compassion brings is an opportunity to give that context and say, okay, maybe this isn't as bad as it may seem. What do I learn from
Hmm.
this? What do I gain from this situation? So, what I believe is, when we do give ourselves compassion, not to give ourselves too much or other people too much, because you don't want to enable behaviors. Maybe that's something you need to change. Maybe you drive too fast. Maybe you failed too many tests. Maybe you need to try a little bit harder, get some tutoring, get some help. So not
Yeah.
giving yourself so much compassion that you don't make yourself any better. And then also not being so critical and using so much accountability where you start to harm yourself because you're not doing the right thing. How do you kind of bring those two things together and create what's called compassionate accountability? Now, another
Mm-hmm.
term that I did not create, which I did, I'll be a millionaire. But there's some folks who talk about this compassion accountability piece and how we create this balance within our lives. And I think that that's a huge part of post traumatic growth and just personal growth in general.
Mm-hmm. So I love that, and I'm writing some things down just as a
Sure.
little mental note for myself. But so and you might have already shared a little bit about this and post traumatic growth, but like where's the balance as far as what people are kind of taking a mental note or introspection, just like where's the balance in seeing compassion and accountability? Like what are some activities that you probably already just said, but I just want to emphasize if
Okay.
there's anything that people can look into to kind of say, here's what I can do. And that might be CBT, but I just want to, for anyone trying
It, yeah,
to do the work.
yeah, it definitely can be CBT. Hold on one second. I was trying to do too many. I was trying to share your post at the same time as I'm going. Um, and then you start talking. Um, so it can definitely be CBT, but one thing that I'll share with compassion accountability, I'll just share it in just like a relationship dynamic, right? So because I think that that's more relatable to most people. So let's just say
Mm-hmm.
you're dating somebody, and that person, they promised they were going to take you out. We're gonna have a fancy. We're gonna go to Dakota Jazz Club. We're gonna have a good old time, right? We're gonna have a nice time. But then they canceled on the day. First day were late, then they canceled. Let's just say it was just completely just thrown off. So you got all dressed up. You was gonna be looking good. You was looking forward to a good time, but the date didn't happen. Now,
Mm-hmm.
as the person who invited you to the date, something may have happened. My roommate could have got sick, or my car could have something happened. Let's say my cat died. We'll just make it traumatic. My cat died, but I don't want to tell you my cat died because you don't like cats, and I learned that about you. And you probably been like, that doesn't matter. Your cat died. I'm more important than your stupid cat. But I didn't want to tell you that. I didn't want to tell you that piece because you don't like cats. Now you're mad at me and you're upset because this date didn't go as planned. You got all dressed up. You're waiting to get picked up and have a good night. And I'm over here sulking because my cat has died. My little cat that
Mm-hmm.
I've had has passed away, and I'm trying to deal with this crisis. But I didn't want to necessarily tell you all about that. Now,
Mm-hmm.
your job for compassion accountability as the person who's invited to the date is to one, figure out what happened. Figure out what happened. What
Mm-hmm.
happened? Why did this day get canceled? You might not get all that information until what, the next day. You might not
Right.
get that information in the moment because he's dealing with potentially a crisis situation. So you're fuming. You're sending text messages. You're sending stuff to your friend. I can't believe this happened, girl. He ain't nothing. Like blah blah. Blah. You're going off, right? And now you're
Mm-hmm.
gonna hold him accountable. Okay, well, you want to cancel on me? I ain't gonna talk to you. I'm gonna block your number. I'm gonna unfriend you on social media. I'm gonna go on
Mm-hmm.
about my life without worrying about you no more. Now, the next day, this gentleman, or to say it's a heterosexual relationship, this gentleman, he's trying to reach you, but he can't because you done blocked him on everything. He's like, what did I do? My
Right.
cat died. Now the girl I'm trying to talk to, she doesn't want to talk to me because I had canceled the date. Now, as
Mm-hmm.
that person who blocked him out of her life, you've missed an opportunity. Now, this could have been the guy. This could have been the one, but you just went off on canceling date. Now, canceling a date is a serious thing. Probably should have gave you some more context, but he didn't. But you didn't allow any opportunity to learn more context of what happened. You could have still
Mm-hmm.
used those actions later. Like you could still have
Mm-hmm.
blocked him and canceled and blocked his number, blocked him on social media, all that stuff later. But you took it, you in the moment, you were hurt and you moved on. And
Mm-hmm.
you didn't allow for more things to take place. Now I just use that random example I made up because a lot of people go through dating stuff, right? This
Yep.
applies in other areas of life where we need more context to understand fully on how we want to act. So if you give
Mm.
yourself a little bit of balance between compassion and accountability, that one protects you and your emotions, but two, it
Yep.
also allows people not to take advantage of you, and it does keep you safe by bringing in the accountability piece. The accountability is taking action. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I'm gonna block you, all that. But you could have waited to do that instead of doing it in the moment. But due to our trauma, due to how we view relationships in these days, you're gonna cut that person off immediately because they didn't show up the way they were supposed to for you. Does that make some sense?
Mm, absolutely. And what I'm hearing is also a little bit of a pause. Like before we
Yes.
move forward in any way, we should just take a pause. Like the immediate response or the reaction that we have from someone else, or even just something that presents itself, it's like we want to just deal with it right then and there instead of saying, wait a second, what's going
Yep.
on? Do I have all the information to make that decision?
Yep. Absolutely. Do you see those questions on Facebook?
I'm not seeing any questions
All
on
right,
Facebook.
I can read. Do you want to take
Go read
questions from
them.
the
I'll
audience?
read them.
One's from your
Yeah,
mama.
absolutely.
One's from your
Yes.
mama. You better
This
take
is
that question.
hi, Mom.
Shout out to your mom. So, I can read them for you.
Yes,
Your
please.
mom.
Thank you.
So your mom's question was: when you have developing thoughts on the trauma events, how do you shift it? That is a great question. A lot of people have like intrusive thoughts. A lot of people have thoughts about the things that have happened. And there's a couple ways that you can deal with those thoughts. My go-to answer for that is always journaling. I think that you need to
Mhm.
process those thoughts outside of your head to the best of your ability. And what I recommend for journaling, you can do the old school journaling where you put pen to pad and you keep a journal. But there's a lot of things you can do today that I think also are just as effective. One thing that I, especially my younger people that I work with, always say you got a voice memo app on your phone, hit the record button and just start talking, talk it out. And then when you don't have anything else to say, stop. And then don't play it back. Just come back to it months later, but just talk it out.
Mhm.
Keep an audio journal of what's going on. You will be surprised when you go back and listen to some of the stuff that you were talking about, where you were at that time, what you thought. Sometimes you'll even surprise yourself what you actually said. It's voice journaling, I think, is a really good tool that people don't use. You
Mhm.
can also do video with that too, but some people don't like to look at themselves. They definitely don't like to hear themselves, but they don't like to look at themselves either. So you can do video journaling as well. Those are helpful tools to just get it out of your head and keep it moving forward. Traumatic memories are things that you can't I don't think you can replace them. I think that they're there, they're part of your subconscious, and they just kind of pop up as they go. So I would recommend, if you have any issues around that, like sometimes people have like panic attacks. You might have panic attacks in your sleep or disrupted sleep. That you start incorporating some breathing exercises when those things happen. If your panic attacks are to a level where you can't stop them, you may need to get some medical attention for that. There's a couple things you can do there, but definitely breathing afterwards is what I would say. So that's kind of a long answer to the question, but I hope I answered it. I hope I
That's so good. That's so good. Thanks, Mom. Shout out to Audrey Clausen.
yeah.
Give
All
her
right,
her
the next
flowers.
yeah, give your mom some flowers. The next question
Hey.
is from Chantel Dream. What's up, Chantel? Um, what ways do you think we can try to improve trauma events in youth to help prevent high A scores and experiences? I mean, that honestly,
Mhm.
that's a question that you can't. If you want to prevent it, you got to have healthy communities. If you want to have healthy communities, you have to have healthy families. That's the only way you
Mhm.
can prevent this. Once the trauma happens, it's not prevention at that point, it's intervention.
Mm.
And just because someone goes through a traumatic experience doesn't mean that their life ends, doesn't mean that they can't keep moving forward. And one thing that really bothers me, and I probably shouldn't even say this, but it really bothers me, is we've taught trauma in schools and we've taught it to kids what it is, but we haven't really taught what to do with it. So now we have a lot of
Right.
people going around saying like, "Oh, I've gone through a lot of trauma. That's why I act like this." Like, yeah, that's true, but you don't gotta act like that. Like, you can stop acting like this. So part of the conversation also is teaching skills to work through the trauma. Knowing your trauma is one thing, having skill sets and coping mechanisms around it is another. And just because someone has bad behavior, that bad behavior doesn't mean that it's just because of their trauma. Sometimes they're just doing stuff they ain't supposed to be doing, and they just need some corrective action that isn't always a punishment, but just a
Mhm.
redirection of what's happening. So that's kind of a
Mhm.
long. If there's a extra question there more specific, I could probably answer more specifically. But that's kind of the general answer to that question.
Okay. How many more questions do we have?
That's it for right now that I can see.
Okay, I don't see anything over here.
Oh, what's up,
Um,
Shar? I'm just looking in the chat. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. This is awesome. I've gotten a lot out of this. listening session, in
Yeah.
all transparency, because Brandon, you bring such a different energy than what I'm hearing in talking about mental health. Oftentimes we're talking high level at an academic terminology, psychological terminology, and so breaking it down to something that's approachable from any level of your awareness around mental health is just so important to the folks listening and to me and anybody watching. So Brandon, where can we find more about post-traumatic growth or your work around mental health? Where would we find that?
Yeah, I am on all social platforms by Brandon Jones. That's BYBRANDONJONES. So if you want to find me on any social media, whether that's YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, I'm even on X and on Instagram, all under by Brandon Jones. If you want to get directly to me, you can go to my website, www.jegna, that's JEGNA.org, jegna.org. You can send me a message there and I'll respond to you there.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Envision Greatness podcast as my first guest. I'm
Absolutely.
so grateful for you and everyone listening and watching. This video will be live on the Envision Greatness channel on YouTube tomorrow, hopefully 24 hours from now. But we're available on any platform that you can think of relative to podcasts. So thank you all for your time this afternoon now. And have a blessed day. Thank you, Brandon, and everyone here. All right.
Absolutely. Have a good one.